In this video, we will be showing you how to use the AFINN and NRC lexicons to perform more sentiment analysis. The first thing you need to do is load your libraries like always, so I will load and run those first. The next thing you need to do is find a novel to download. This will be the same sort of downloading that we have done in the Bing video, so if you need further instructions on how to do this, check out our How to Use the Bing Lexicon video. First, I'm going to download Frankenstein from Project Gutenberg, and then I am going to count up the number of chapters and unnest our tokens by word. To refresh your memory, the Frankenstein variable when you are finished with it should look something like this, with line IDs, chapter numbers, and words in their own singular rows. The next thing you're going to want to do is download the AFINN lexicon, and we will do this by creating a variable titled AFINN, and then I'm going to use lexicon _AFINN, enter. If this is the first time you've ever used this, there's going to be some prompts that pop up in your console, and you'll need to type 1 and hit enter in order to allow you to use the AFINN lexicon. Because I have downloaded it before, I don't need to do that step. You only have to do it the first time. Now, let's look at AFINN and see what it looks like. In the AFINN variable, we see a list of words and we see different values. AFINN rates words on their positive or negative scale from -5 to 5. So it's very similar to Bing, except in this case you have numerical values instead of simply positive or negative. Because they are not quite the same, we are going to have to use slightly different code. To do this, we will have to use the group by function and the summarize function. Let's see what this looks like. First, let's create a variable called frank_AFINN, and then we're going to take from the Frankenstein variable we already created. We're going to inner join our AFINN as usual, the same as we would do with Bing. And then we are going to use the group by function. And in this case, we're going to group by chapter number so that the computer is separating each chapter sort of mentally so that it can perform the next operation. After that, we are going to use the summarize function. We are going to summarize by sentiment, and then we are going to equal that to the sum of the value of each sentiment. This is going to do a similar thing to what we did with Bing, where we counted up our total sentiments, but because the sentiments are numerical instead of strings, we have to do it this way. So let's run this code and see what we get. All right. Now we have a frank_AFINN variable, and you can see that each chapter has its own sentiment value. These sentiment values are probably going to differ from the ones you found with Bing because of the way AFINN works as opposed to Bing. The last thing you can do with AFINN is find the total value of the novel. So in this case, we will use the sum function, and then we will take our frank_AFINN variable, and then we will use our $ indicator, and then by sentiment. Running this, we get a number of 15. If you remember from the previous video, the other number from Bing was somewhere in the -700s. So one thought process you can go through is, why do you think those two numbers are so vastly different using these two different lexicons? Next, I'm also going to show you how to work with the NRC dataset, which is a little different than AFINN and Bing. NRC actually takes a list of words and uses 10 different sentiments, anger, joy, fear, etc., and classifies words that way instead of numerically or just by positive, negative. So let's start by looking at NRC today. We're going to do NRC, assignment operator, lexicon _NRC. Then you have to hit enter again. And just like the AFINN, if this is your first time running this, you will have to indicate 1 in the console to ensure that you can download NRC completely. Now that NRC is loaded, let's look at what it looks like. You can see here that each word has a sentiment associated with it: trust, fear, negative, sadness, and so on. There are actually 10 of these in total, and some words may be associated with more than one sentiment. That is good to keep in mind. So let's look at specifically the words that are associated with joy according to NRC. We're going to create a variable, NRC joy. We will take our NRC variable. Then we are going to use the filter function to filter by sentiment, our quotation marks, and joy. Now when we take a look at this new variable, we will only see words that are associated with the joy sentiment. This can be useful if there's a specific type of sentiment you are looking for in analyzing some sort of novel or corpus. Now, let's see what we can do with filtering like that. We're going to create a new variable called Frank_joy. And then we're going to take Frankenstein, and then we're going to inner join with the NRC joy variable that we created. Then we are also going to count the number of times each word appears. And finally, we are going to use the top n function to look at the top number of words. In this case, we're going to look at the top 20 joy words within Frankenstein. Now we can view this data, and we can see all 20 of the words that are most associated with joy in the Frankenstein novel. Another interesting thing we can do in NRC is look at the top words for all of the sentiments as opposed to just one sentiment. So let's create a Frank_NRC variable, take that from our Frankenstein book, inner join with the whole NRC this time instead of just the joy. Then we're going to count by word and sentiment. So what this will do is count the number of times each word appears separated by the sentiment. Then we are going to group by the sentiment itself to separate all 10 of them from each other. Next, we are going to take the top n function, and to keep our list fairly small, we're going to only use 10. So we will be looking at the top 10 words of each sentiment. Then we will ungroup to remove that separation by sentiment. And then we are going to mutate this to reorder by number. Let's run this whole line of code and see what happens. We now have Frankenstein NRC, and we can see that word affection appears 3 different times associated with joy, positive, and trust. We can also see that creature appears multiple times, and so on. Death appears quite a few times. This is all data you can use in your analysis. Finally, one other thing to note is that Frank NRC has 101 observations, which means that if we were searching for the top 10 words in each sentiment, we should only have 100. Therefore, there's going to be one sentiment in here that had a tie for number 10 and gave us 11 words instead of 10, which resulted in 101 words instead of 100. And there you have it, some of the different things you can do with the AFINN and NRC lexicons. Check back in the next video for how to graph some of this data.